Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public scoping meeting for the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Thank you all very much for joining. We're very appreciative of having a number of people who have joined and are able to participate this evening. My name is Emily Capello, and I am the consultant for the BLM, and I'm going to facilitate the meeting tonight. Tonight's scoping meeting will include an introduction by the Las Vegas Field Office Acting Field Manager, Corrine Francis, followed by introductions of the participants from the BLM Southern Nevada District and Panorama Environmental Inc., the third-party contractor who is facilitating tonight's session. After introduction, Whitney Worthland, BLM Project Manager, will present on the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project and provide a short overview of the BLM process. Following the presentations, there will be a question and answer session facilitated by Panorama Environmental with responses from the BLM. And then we will open up the forum for public comment. Then we will close out for the evening. This meeting will be recorded and the video will be posted to the project information webpage at the address in the screen. We will post that address in the chat. Now we will turn it over to Corrine Francis, Acting Las Vegas Field Manager, for a short introduction and an overview of our presenters and other participants for this evening's scoping meeting.
Thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public scoping meeting for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. My name is Corrine Francis, and I am the Acting Field Manager for the BLM Las Vegas Field Office. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. The Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project is located in the Pahrump Valley, south of State Route 160 and adjacent to the Clark-Nye County line. The BLM completed the variance review for this project in May this year and has initiated environmental planning required by the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA. Input provided during the variance review will be carried forward into this NEPA process for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. These virtual scoping meetings, along with the scoping period that will be open until December 5th, are part of the first steps of the NEPA process. During scoping, BLM asked for comments and input on the proposed project to better understand potential issues and concerns, as well as develop a reasonable range of alternatives to the proposed action. The presentation tonight is intended to inform all of you of the project details such as type of solar facilities, location, size, timeline, and issues already identified through the variance review. We will explain the NEPA process and what kind of information will be most helpful during the scoping period. Before we begin, I want to make sure everyone knows that we are still in the early stage of NEPA process, so we may not have all the answers to your in-depth or specific questions. We will work hard to provide you with the answers to your questions later in the meeting, but please know that even hearing your questions will help us better understand what needs to be analyzed. Before we begin with the presentation, I would like to introduce you to the speakers today. Whitney Worthland is the project manager for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, and she will be providing an overview presentation on the project as well as the NEPA process. Whitney is also joined by other BLM staff members who are shown on the screen and are working behind the scenes to help answer your questions later in this meeting. At this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Emily to go over tonight's meeting format.
Thank you, Corrine. Tonight's forum will provide opportunities for questions and public input. There will be a question and answer session where written questions can be submitted. There will also be an opportunity for verbal public input toward the end of the scoping meeting. We'll have more information about these two opportunities later on. The BLM is also providing opportunity after the scoping meeting for public input and questions until December 5th, 2022. Input and questions can be submitted via the Participate Now button on ePlanning, email to the email address on the screen, or via mail to the BLM Southern Nevada District Office. We will also provide this information in the chat for this forum. As mentioned on this slide, before including your address, phone number, email address, or other personal identifying information in your comment, You should be aware that your entire comment, including your personal identifying information, may be publicly available at any time. While you can ask that your personal identifying information be withheld from public review, BLM cannot guarantee that they'll be able to do so. Anonymity is not allowed for submissions from organizations or businesses and from individuals identifying themselves as representatives or officials of organizations or businesses. Now Whitney will present an overview on the Rough Hat Clark County project, as well as the BLM solar application evaluation process.
Thank you, Emily, and good evening, everyone. Candela Renewables submitted a right-of-way application for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project for the construction, operation, maintenance, and eventual decommissioning of a proposed 400 megawatt solar photovoltaic power generating facility with interconnection to the regional transmission system and battery storage of up to 200 megawatts. The project is proposed on approximately 2,400 acres of BLM administered lands within the Pahrump Valley, southeast of the town of Pahrump and 35 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Due to the location of the project on variance lands identified in the Solar Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, or Solar PEIS, the project was subject to the variance process. The BLM issued a variance determination on the project in May 2022, which determined it appropriate to initiate the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, process for the project. Additional information on the variance process for the project will be presented later in the meeting and can be found at the project webpage, which we have included a link to in the chat. The map on the screen shows the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project as the red triangle in the middle of the map, adjacent to the Clark-Nye County line and south of State Route 160. Candela Renewables have proposed a generation tie, or GenTie, transmission line for the project, which is shown in green on the map. The proposed GenTie line parallels State Route 160 before turning south to the constructed Trout Canyon substation, identified as the black rectangle on the map. Existing transmission lines and infrastructure would be utilized to transmit the electricity to the grid. This map shows the location of the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project in relation to local roads and streets within the Pahrump Valley area, including Tacoma Springs Road, Brown Springs Road, Old Route 16, Hafen Ranch Road, and Trout Canyon Road. The screen shows the proposed project components. The Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project includes the installation of solar arrays within the project area, which are composed of solar photovoltaic modules on fixed tilt or single axis mounting systems. The solar arrays would connect to power conversion stations that would help transmit electricity to the on-site substation through a series of above ground and underground collection systems. Once the electricity reaches the on-site substation, it is delivered off-site to the constructed Trout Canyon substation via the proposed interconnection GenTie line. The project would also include the construction of battery storage facilities, which are planned to store up to 200 megawatts of energy. Additional facilities proposed for construction include an operations and maintenance building, communication facilities, meteorological stations, and site security and fencing. The preliminary plan of development for the proposed project is available online at the project webpage, which we have provided a link to in the chat. The map on the screen shows the layout of the proposed solar arrays, project fence line, inter-array access roads, on-site substation and office building, and conduit areas. The proposed solar arrays avoid major drainages that occur throughout the project area, as shown by the aerial imagery beneath. Along with analysis of the solar project components, the environmental impact statement will include analysis of a resource management plan amendment for the visual resource management class that intersects the project. In BLM, land use plans are referred to as resource management plans, or RMPs. The RMP provides guidance for proposed projects and decisions within a geographic area and helps BLM manage those identified public lands. For the BLM Southern Nevada District, the approved RMP is the 1998 Las Vegas RMP. BLM regulations require that all actions and authorizations conform to the approved RMP. If a specific project cannot be modified sufficiently to conform to the RMP, then the RMP may be amended so that that project can achieve the required conformance. In the case of the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, the BLM anticipates a RMP amendment to address project conformance with the area's Visual Resource Management, or VRM, classification, which was designated as VRM Class 3 in the RMP. BLM is considering amending the RMP so that the Visual Resource Management classification of the project area may be modified from Class 3 to Class 4. A utility-scale solar project such as Rough Hat Clark County would be compatible with VRM Class 4 management objectives and therefore in conformance with the RMP. BLM will analyze the proposed RMP amendment in the same NEPA environmental impact statement as the solar project itself. As the environmental impact statement includes a RMP amendment, the draft EIS must be made available for a 90-day public comment period, and the final EIS must be presented to the governor's office for a 60-day consistency review to ensure that the project is consistent with state and local plans, policies, and programs. During the scoping period, the BLM provides preliminary planning criteria for review, which is available at the project website. The flowchart on the screen shows the application evaluation process, which begins with submittal of a solar project application. The application is then prioritized based on regulations and involves interdisciplinary team review. This helps the BLM prioritize and process the solar application workload more efficiently. After prioritization, the application moves to the solar application evaluation process, which includes the variance process and involves public information forums and agency coordination. When the evaluation is complete, the BLM will determine whether to continue to process the application and initiate the NEPA process. For the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, the BLM determined to continue processing the application and initiate the NEPA process. The scoping meetings are part of the early stages of the NEPA process for the project. The BLM completed review of the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project through the variance process described under the Solar PEIS. The variance process involved public outreach and coordination with appropriate federal, state, local, and tribal governments. Input was gathered through 2 virtual public information forums, an agency meeting, and associated input periods. During the public input period, 19 verbal comments and 45 input submissions via email or physical mail were received. Agency coordination on the project yielded 3 comment letters received during the input period. In addition to the public and agency input, BLM sent letters and conducted field trips for Native American tribes to assess interest and concerns with the project. BLM also sent letters to initiate formal government-to-government consultation. Tribal consultation is ongoing for the project. Additional information on the input received during the variance process for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project can be found at the project webpage. On the screen, you will see a flowchart outlining the NEPA process for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. The NEPA process begins with the publication of a notice of intent announcing the intentions of the BLM to complete an environmental impact statement. And in the case of this project, a resource management plan amendment. The notice of intent for the project was published in October 21st, 2022, and initiates the 45-day scoping period. The scoping meeting tonight is included in this step of the NEPA process. After scoping, the BLM reviews comments provided, generates issues to analyze, identifies any suggested alternatives, and develops the draft environmental impact statement and the draft resource management plan amendment. The draft environmental impact statement for the project and resource management plan amendment are published for a 90-day review period, initiated by the publication of a notice of availability. Comments submitted during the public review period are reviewed and substantive comments are responded to in the final EIS and proposed resource management plan amendment. The final EIS and proposed resource management plan amendment are made available for 30 days with publication of a notice of availability. During the availability period, there is an additional review of the documents through a 30-day protest period and the Nevada Governor's consistency review of the final EIS and proposed resource management plan. If protests are received, they are responded to, and if no additional changes to the document are necessary, then BLM would issue a record of decision for the environmental impact statement, which, if the project is approved, a right-of-way grant and notice to proceed would be generated. The input received during the variance process yield preliminary concerns identified by the public, local, state, federal agencies, and tribes, which are displayed on this slide. Additionally, the BLM conducted internal scoping of the project with the BLM interdisciplinary team, which also generated preliminary resource concerns. These resources and issues will be considered during the analysis for the environmental impact statement. In order to adequately analyze the effects of the project, multiple resource technical studies have been completed or are scheduled to be completed. The list on the screen shows the technical studies currently required for the project, as well as the status or timeframe on when they would be completed. After the public scoping period, the BLM will determine if any additional technical studies are needed to analyze the effects from the project. The next few slides provide additional information on issues and resource concerns identified during the input period for the variance process, as well as review of the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project by the BLM interdisciplinary team. These issues and resource concerns will be considered during the NEPA analysis for the project, along with those additional issues and resource concerns identified during the scoping process. Input gathered on the project identified potential concerns for biological and vegetation resources from the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Issues identified included effects to special status wildlife species, like the threatened and endangered desert tortoise, and impacts to sensitive vegetation and soils from the proposed solar project. To assist in the analysis of these identified resource concerns, the BLM has coordinated with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and is required to complete Section 7 consultation in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. This was include receiving a biological opinion from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as a desert tortoise translocation plan. Additionally, the BLM has initiated coordination with the Nevada Department of Wildlife about potential impacts from the project. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Nevada Department of Wildlife have accepted cooperating agency status for the project. Input received and BLM interdisciplinary team review of the proposed project also identified issues and concerns related to visual resources and recreation opportunities within the project area. These included issues related to the visual resource management class for the area, views from State Route 160 and the surrounding communities, view of the proposed project from the Old Spanish National Historic Trail, and access to public lands and recreation use of the project area, including off-highway vehicle use, hiking, equestrian use, and camping. In order to help analyze these concerns, visual resource simulations are being completed, which would be fully described in a visual resources technical report. Additionally, the BLM, the applicant, will be gathering data on the use of trails within and adjacent to the proposed project area. Input gathered also identified potential concerns with cultural and tribal resources from the proposed project. Input identified the project proximity to the Old Spanish National Historic Trail. Further review determined that the project is more than 7 miles from the National Historic Trail, which is outside of the preliminary 5-mile trail corridor. Additional cultural resource and tribal concerns were identified. To help address and analyze these resource concerns, the BLM will be consulting with the Nevada State Historic Preservation Office under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. This consultation process will be incorporated with the NEPA process for the project, and additional information on the National Historic Preservation Act can be found at the project website. A cultural resources report was completed for the project, which BLM has reviewed, provided initial site recommendations, and transmitted the report and recommendations to the Nevada State Historic Preservation Office for their review and concurrence. The BLM has initiated engagement with Native American tribal governments, which included sending letters to invite the tribes to initiate formal government-to-government consultation and field trips to the proposed project. The BLM also invited the tribes to participate as cooperating agencies for the project. Tribal consultation for the project is ongoing. Potential impacts to socioeconomics and air quality from the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project were submitted during the input period. These included impacts to local economies and communities, job creation, valley fever, and climate change. To assist with the analysis of these issues, the BLM and third-party NEPA contractor are working on an economic modeling report and air quality air quality modeling report and associated modeling. Issues related to water use, identified source, and stormwater and erosion concerns were gathered during the input period and BLM interdisciplinary review of the project. The applicant would be required, as necessary, to receive a Section 404 Clean Water Act permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for any jurisdictional waters that may be impacted by the project. Jurisdictional waters determined for the project is ongoing. The BLM will require a water supply assessment to be completed by the applicant, which would identify the water source which would be utilized during construction and operation of the proposed project. Candela Renewables is currently assessing water sources within the project area and will be providing an updated water supply assessment. Additionally, the applicant will provide a drainage study for the proposed project, which BLM and other federal and local governments will review. Candela Renewables will also be required to obtain permits for the project from Clark County. Input gathered during the variance process yield concerns about the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project in relation to other proposed projects within the Pahrump Valley area. Impacts from the proposed project and other actions within a given area and timeframe will be analyzed as part of the cumulative effects analysis for the project. Cumulative effects are those impacts on the environment that result from incremental impact of the proposed action when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions, regardless of who is undertaking the action. This means actions proposed on federal, state, local, or private lands within an identified area and timeframe would be included in the cumulative effects analysis. On the screen, you will see a map of the proposed solar projects within the Pahrump Valley that are at various stages of review and processing by the BLM. These proposed projects are considered reasonably foreseeable future projects and would be included in the cumulative effects analysis for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable actions will be identified during the NEPA process, including the scoping period. On the map, you will see the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project highlighted in purple striping. On the map, you will see the 4 other proposed projects and 1 currently authorized project located within the Pahrump Valley. The Copper Ray Solar Project, shown as the blue colored boundary, completed application evaluation in March of 2022. The scoping period for the Copper Ray Solar Project initiated on November 14th, 2022, and scoping meetings will occur on December 6th and December 7th, 2022. We will include information on how to register for these meetings in the chat. The Golden Current and Mosey Solar projects, shown in brown and teal on the map respectively, are currently undergoing review. The Golden Current project is undergoing variance process review. The Mosey Solar project is undergoing internal BLM review and was determined to be a medium priority project. The Rough Hat Nye County Solar Project, shown as the green colored boundary, is currently paused while the applicant coordinates with Nye County and the local community to address concerns with the proposed project layout. On the map, you will also see the location of the approved Yellow Pine Solar Project, shown in yellow, which was authorized with a record of decision in the fall of 2020. If you have any information on additional projects or actions within or adjacent to the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, that information would be helpful for the NEPA analysis. Currently, we are in the public scoping period for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Tonight's public scoping meeting and the scoping period that lasts until December 5th, 2022, provide you an opportunity to provide comments on the project. The information gathered during the meeting and the scoping period will inform the NEPA process and assist BLM in determining issues, impacts, and potential alternatives that would be addressed in the upcoming analysis. After the public scoping meetings have concluded, we'll continue to gather comments on the project until December 5th, 2022. The information we gathered will be considered in the draft environmental impact statement and resource management plan amendment, which is expected summer 2023. More information on the project can be found at the project webpage on the screen. We've also provided this information in the chat. Helpful input and comments from you would include suggestions on how to refine the proposed project with methods for reducing or avoiding impacts to resources, including wildlife, botanical species, soils, landscape views, water resources, or recreation use. Comments on reasonable alternatives to the proposed action would also be helpful. Also helpful would be identification of specific issues or concerns which may be evaluated in detail in the analysis. as well as identifying other past, present, or future actions within or adjacent to the project area. At this time, I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Emily, who will begin the question and answer session.
Thank you, Whitney. That concludes the presentation. We will now have a question and answer section on the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Questions can be submitted using the Q&A box by following the instructions on the slide. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A feature to submit questions. Please understand that some questions will be answered live during this question and answer session, while some may be answered in writing in the Q&A feature. Anyone can see all the questions answered in chat by clicking on the Show All button. As questions begin to come in, I will facilitate asking the questions as the project manager, Whitney Worthland, will answer them. Okay, we have our first question. The question is, will the desert tortoise clearance for Rough Hat Clark and Copper Rays projects take place at the same time by the same biologist?
Desert tortoise clearance is dependent on approval of each project individually. Each project is considered a standalone project, meaning it is not dependent on any other approval or implementation. If approved, it is possible that the same biological consulting firm may be hired by the applicants for clearance surveys, though it is not required.
Thank you, Whitney. We're just getting organized for the next question. And the next question is, how many Joshua trees are on site?
2022 surveys of the site found 52 Joshua trees within the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project boundary.
Thanks, Whitney. Thank you for your patience. I just want to remind everyone that the scoping period is through December 5th, and that after this meeting, you'll be able to provide any additional comments or questions in writing to the BLM via email or mail. All right. Seems the next question is, why was the RMP not amended for Yellow Pine Solar? Why was the VRM class for Yellow Pine not downgraded with a plan amendment? What is the difference?
So during the analysis of the Yellow Pine Solar Project, the potential visual contrast from the project were determined to meet the Visual Resource Management Class 3 objective to allow for a moderate level of change. The BLM is considering an RFP amendment for the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project to account for potential major modifications to the existing landscape from the additional development, and also its closer proximity to the community of Pahrump. Visual simulations and a supporting technical report are currently being prepared.
Thank you, Whitney. We'll just give a couple more minutes while questions are being teed up and organized. Okay, the next question is, how many parishes Club Cholla are on site?
Sure. Botanical surveys in 2021 involved in part belt transects to estimate the number of cacti and yucca within the project area. Based on these belt transects, there were an estimated 1,305 parish Club Cholla within the project area.
Thank you, Whitney. We'll just give a couple more minutes. As a reminder, if anybody wants to ask a question, they can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The next question is, how many acre feet of water will be used for construction? Where will the project get water? And how much per year for operations?
The project anticipates needing up to 800 acre feet of water for construction of the project, which is anticipated for 12 to 18 months. After that, it's anticipated that 16 acre feet per year would be needed for operations and maintenance. The project sponsor has indicated that water is likely to be trucked to the site from a local source, but alternately, the project may install a well on site. Candela Renewables is currently working on updating their project water supply assessment to provide additional information on their identified water source, which would be utilized for construction, operation, and maintenance through the development of the project.
Thank you, Whitney. So while we wait for a couple more questions, I just want to remind everybody that if even if your question isn't answered live, you would still be able to ask questions throughout all of the presentation, and then they would be answered in the chat, in the Q&A function. The next question is, how many yucca are within the project area?
Sure. So the belt transects within the project area were done during the 2021 botanical surveys. And based on that data, it's estimated that there are 56,818 yucca within the project area. Once the botanical report is accepted as final by the BLM, that report will be made available on the e-planning website for review.
Thank you, Whitney. And as a reminder to everybody, the e-planning website is in the chat in case anybody wants to see where to go. I'll just give a few more minutes. Let's see. So the next question is Nye County a cooperating agency for Rough Hat Clark County, even though it is not in Nye County, but near it?
Yes, although the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project is located in Clark County, BLM did send invitations to Nye County to be cooperators on the project during the environmental review process. Nye County has accepted that, and so they are a cooperating agency for the project.
Thank you, Whitney. So we're still coordinating questions, but I just wanted to remind everyone that they are welcome to ask questions anytime throughout this entire process. Or they can also ask questions after our scoping meeting to the BLM. Okay, and here is a question that came in from the registration. And it was, the water use will present issues for the basin and the existing users. Will that be something considered in the review of the project? What is the anticipated water needs for the project?
Yes, input received during the variance process and during the input periods for that process, and also coordination with agencies did include concerns related to the proposed project water use in relation to the hydrologic basin as a whole. This issue will be carried forward for the analysis in the environmental impact statement. We are still early in the environmental review process, so the level of impact is not known at this time. However, the BLM will consider water, both surface and groundwater, within the broader context of all resources on BLM administered lands and their interconnection as they relate to BLM responsibilities. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the project anticipates needing up to 800 acre-feet of water for full construction, mostly for dust control, and 16 acre-feet per year after that for operations and maintenance.
Thank you, Whitney. Another question that was provided in the registration was, what are the potential impacts to the Old Spanish Historic Trail Corridor?
The proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, including the generation tie line or the gen tie line to the existing Trout Canyon substation, is located over 7 miles away from the Old Spanish National Historic Trail and is therefore outside of the interim 5-mile corridor. Impacts from the project to the Old Spanish National Historic Trail are not anticipated due to the distance from the trail corridor.
Thank you, Whitney. It looks like some additional Q&A questions are coming in. So if everyone could just give a couple more minutes, we'll get organized and continue asking the questions. The next registration question that came in was, what would decommissioning of the site entail?
Oh, struggling with the mute button there. As part of the environmental review process, both a restoration and a decommissioning plan would be developed using the Southern Nevada District BLM standard restoration plan template. The restoration plan will address the restoration of the temporary disturbance, which typically includes laydown areas that are only used during construction, while the decommissioning plan would address removal of the components of the project and restoring the long-term disturbance of the entire right-of-way. These plans will contain standards for restoration of the site. These are based on reference site conditions and have performance measures that are a certain percentage of the vegetation cover, including density, et cetera, as compared to the vegetation in an unimpacted surrounding area. Vegetation conditions in the restoration area are required to be at least 60% of the reference site conditions to be considered successful.
Thank you, Whitney. So as we continue to coordinate questions, I just want to keep reminding everybody that the scoping period is open until December 5th. But also just thank everybody for all the questions that they're providing now, as they'll be very helpful when the BLM works on the environmental review document. Just a couple more minutes. Thanks everybody for your patience. And while we do have a fair amount of time left still for the Q&A, I just want to also remind everybody that you can see all the questions that come in via the show all function. And if any of them were to be answered, that would be available to the full public as well.
Hey, Emily, it looks like another question has come in related to the botanical surveys.
You're right, it just popped up. It says, will the botanical survey be repeated following a wet enough period to ensure germination of most annuals?
So there were no sensitive plant species habitat identified in the project area for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. Although most surveys did take place in 2021, which was also very dry. But because there were no sensitive species habitat within the project area, this was not as much of a concern. However, there were additional visits to the site in 2022 to collect additional species information.
Thank you, Whitney. Another question is, do you know if an on-site well was approved by the Nevada Division of Water Resources?
So the project may install a well on site if that alternative is ultimately selected. That is an alternative that we would carry forward in the NEPA analysis to review the environmental effects from that option. The Nevada Department of Water Resources is responsible for the allocation of water resources within the state of Nevada. So,
thank you, Whitney. Just a couple more minutes. The next question is, how much will our property values depreciate?
This was also an item that was submitted during the variance input period from comments during that time frame. And although we do not currently have information on effects to property values, the BLM will be considering the effects of the project on the local community and economics through the environmental review or the environmental impact statement process. BLM is working with a contractor, a third-party contractor, to develop modeling and prepare an economic modeling report that would help support the analysis of this topic. The analysis and economic modeling report will be available for review and comment during the review and comment period for the draft environmental impact statement and the proposed resource management plan.
Thank you, Whitney. Another question that just came in is what mitigation requirements would the BLM require to inform any adaptive management, especially for desert tortoise?
Sure. So currently we are requesting information about potential resource concerns, issues for analysis, alternatives to the proposed action. And as we work through the environmental review process for the project, relevant mitigation, including mitigation fees or other species-specific mitigation that we identify would be identified in that document and addressed as part of the analysis. That analysis and that mitigation would be presented in the draft environmental impact statement, which would be made available for public review and comment.
Thank you, Whitney. Let's see, there was also a clarifying question about whether operations required 16 acre feet a year or 60.
Yes, I apologize. Operations and maintenance for the project will require 16 acre feet, 16 acre feet annual after construction.
Thank you. Just a little bit more patience. We're teeing up some more questions. The next question is this area an important habitat for Bendier's thrasher or LeConte's thrasher?
The area is not considered important habitat for the Bendier's thrasher or the LeConte's thrasher. Each solar application in the Pahrump Valley is required to have thrasher surveys conducted for analysis. The results of those surveys, there were no thrashers detected during any targeted surveys conducted for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project within the project area.
Thank you, Whitney. The next question is how many alternatives does the BLM anticipate evaluating in the EIS? What variation do you anticipate across the alternatives?
Sure. So we are still early in the NEPA process. We're in the scoping stage of that process. And the scoping process will help BLM identify those alternatives to the proposed action, as well as resource issue for analysis. We currently have not developed any alternatives at this time. We're waiting for the scoping process and to receive comment and input before developing those alternatives. So comments suggesting reasonable alternatives to the solar project are currently proposed and appreciated.
Thank you, Whitney. That's a good reminder for everyone that there's several different ways to comment, and we've placed them into the chat for you to be able to find them easily. The next comment or the next question is, has the BLM considered a programmatic environmental analysis for these projects versus evaluating project by project?
So although the proposed projects are located in a similar area, BLM received individual applications for the 5 standalone projects. Each project is considered a standalone project. That means that it's not dependent upon any other approval or implementation for other projects. Each application area also has potential site-specific resource concerns. Even though there will be separate analysis and environmental reviews, the BLM is committed to analyzing the combined environmental impacts from the proposed projects through the cumulative effects analysis for each independent project.
Thank you, Wing. The next question is, why was this site selected knowing it's within 3 miles of the town of Pahrump?
So the applicant, Candela Renewables, identified and applied for the proposed project area. The BLM completed the application prioritization process and the variance process for the proposed Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. The variance process identified included public and agency meetings, as well as agency and tribal coordination. This information gathered during the variance process is available at the project website.
Thank you, Wing. The next question is desert pavement present within the proposed area? And if so, what total acreage of delicate soils would be impacted by implementation?
So desert pavement is a visual resource where the surface is covered by closely packed interlocking angular and rounded rock fragments left on the surface from aeolian action that removes smaller sand. Desert pavement is sometimes referred to as desert varnish. However, in the project area did not encounter any rare or endangered soil types similar to desert pavement.
Thank you, Wing. There's still some more questions coming in. Let's see. The next one is, does the BLM also anticipate an RMP amendment to relocate the utility corridor that crosses the site?
So for the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project, the RMP amendment will be for the visual resource management class that was designated within the project area. There are no utility corridors that cross the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project boundary. So the RMP amendment will not be focused on utility corridors because there are none there to relocate. It will focus on the visual resource management class modification.
Thank you, Whitney. The next question we have is, how will you prevent badgers from eating translocated tortoises?
The BLM is aware of this issue, and the BLM and Fish and Wildlife Service are currently developing strategies to reduce the risk of predation during translocation. Some of these would be predator surveys would be conducted in translocation areas prior to the translocation of tortoises to assess predator diversity, abundance, and also the likelihood of predation. Additionally, the BLM and the Fish and Wildlife Service are considering multiple protective measures, including the release of tortoises into pre-existing burrows within the translocation areas during late fall or prior to winter dormant season where they will be temporarily penned. Penning will serve to protect desert tortoises from predation through their winter brumation cycle and allow for individuals to acclimate to their new environment ahead of unpenning in the following spring.
So just as a reminder to everybody, we are definitely trying to answer as many questions as we can live. If we're not able to answer all the questions live, we will answer them in the Q&A function afterwards, but we are doing our very best to get as many answered live as possible. It just takes a little while to get them organized and then be able to provide a response. Just a little bit more patience and we'll see the next questions coming through. The next question is, what is the vegetation restoration effectiveness standard of roughly 60% that was previously mentioned based upon?
Sure. So the BLM Southern Nevada District has a restoration plan template that we utilize in order to standardize restoration criteria between projects. That 60% is the minimum restoration standard, with the expectation that if vegetation is reaching that standard, that it is sufficiently recovered that it can continue to grow and reestablish on its own.
Thank you, Wade. We still have a few more questions and we want to get as many answered as possible. So we just ask for a little bit of patience and then we'll continue providing the questions. I'll also take this opportunity to just remind folks that as we continue the presentation and once we have the public comment period, we can also continue to answer questions as they come in via the Q&A feature. So we should have time for maybe just 2 to 3 more questions. Another topic from the registration which came up was which Native American tribes will be consulted and how will the BLM reach out to them? How does BLM consult with Native American tribes?
So the BLM has initiated engagement with 15 Indian tribal nation governments, which includes sending letters to invite the tribes to initiate formal government-to-government consultation. Tribal consultation for the project is currently ongoing. A detailed list of those tribes that BLM has initiated engagement with can be found at the Notice of Intent, which was published in the Federal Register and is also available on the project website. In addition to government consultation responsibilities, the BLM also invited those 15 Indian tribal nations to be cooperating agencies on the Rough Hat Clark County Solar Project. The specific protocols for how consultation proceeds and what consultation looks like will be dependent on BLM's relationship with each tribe. Generally, this consultation consists of coordination between the BLM's authorized officer and the individual tribal governments to identify specific tribal concerns and then work with necessary individuals to address those concerns. These efforts are part of an ongoing relationship between the BLM and each tribal government.
Thank you, Whitney. So we'll try to get to one or two more questions before we turn to the public comment section. The next question is, does the BLM seriously expect that our community's need for electrical energy will disappear after 30 years? Why is a decommissioning and reclamation plan even being required? These land use changes will be permanent.
So as specified in the regulation and the record of decision for the solar programmatic environmental impact statement, the BLM requires that a decommissioning and reclamation plan, along with a performance and a reclamation bond for all solar energy projects to ensure compliance with all the requirements of the right-of-way. If the project is approved, BLM will require that the applicant provide an adequate reclamation bond to cover the full decommissioning and restoration of the site. All projects are required to submit a bond prior to ground disturbing activities, which includes construction. And having a reclamation bond in place for an approved project means that if the company was unable to complete the decommissioning for any reason, the BLM could attach the bond and utilize the funds for up to the full amount that was identified in that bond to complete the decommissioning and restoration.
Thank you, Whitney. The next question was, what was the estimated tortoise density from surveys?
The calculated tortoise density from the tortoise surveys conducted on the project site is 5.6 tortoises per square kilometer.
Thank you, Whitney. Just a little bit more patience. We're trying to get maybe one or two more questions before we return. So the last question that we have for time for right now is, how many live tortoise were found on surveys during surveys?
Sure. So 52 live adults and 5 juvenile desert tortoise were found during the tortoise surveys.
Thank you, Whitney. So unfortunately, that's all the time we really have right now for the Q&A, but just as a reminder to everybody, any questions that weren't answered live will be answered in the question and answer function. And as we continue throughout the next hour, please feel free to continue asking questions and we will continue to answer them. Next slide, please. So we will now transition on to the verbal input section. We will not be answering questions live, as I mentioned, but we will continue to respond to them in writing, or you can email or mail any remaining questions to the BLM. As a reminder to everyone, anyone can see all the questions answered in the chat using the Show All button. We're going to take verbal input following the order in which people pre-registered and said yes or maybe to wanting to provide public comments. Please use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen and the facilitator will open your microphone. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand with *9 and then unmute and mute using *6. You will see a 2-minute timer on the next slide, and this will display the amount of time you have for your public comment. We are reserving 2 minutes per public comment input. Your input will be included in the project public record. After going through the list of people who pre-registered to speak, we'll move on to any who may want to provide input that did not identify.
Pretty ugly looking, and they won't do us any good. They're going to cause more harm to our to our environment, and then they're going to do anything for us. Because even though that our local electrical company does belong to the California ISO, but it doesn't mean we're going to benefit, our community is going to benefit from the electricity. So to retract, to kind of emphasize, I'm against any of these solar farms and their location, because they're going to be ugly alongside the highway. And it's not necessarily, I don't want to see these things for the next 30 years, for the last few years, to be perfectly honest, even though I do have solar on my home. Anyway, well, good luck with the projects, and I hope we don't see them going any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next up is Simone Griffin. Can you raise your hand, please? Simone, we will unmute you, and then if you'd like to speak, you can speak. Okay, we can come back to Simone. Next on the list was Tina von Kugelin. As a reminder, if you are on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Doesn't seem like Tina is on, so we'll go to the next person on the list, Megan Labadie. And I apologize for the mispronunciation of the last names. Is Megan in attendance? Are you able to raise your hand? Would you like to speak? Okay, we'll go to the next person on the list. Is Jordan Jarrett here? Next up, we have Joyce Barishman. Joyce, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak tonight. I am totally against this project. This land belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the solar farms and their profit, and to make our land ugly and to use our water. It's very close to my house. This would affect my water and everyone else in the community nearby in Pahrump. This is not a good project. We are against it. It's ugly. It causes dust. It's unhealthy. And this is just to benefit selfish people that want it for their personal gain. It's a question that was not answered. And I wanted to know, we have a water board here in Pahrump. There's a committee that meets every month. And I want to know why they're not involved. This will definitely affect our water levels here in Pahrump. And they need to be consulted as well. I think this project should be ended. Again, this is the public land, and this land is for the people. It's not for solar farms. I don't care that our government has allowed for this to happen. It's ridiculous. It's not right. And I agree with Michael Fender, everything said. I don't want to see this for the next 30 years by my house, or when I drive by to go to Clark County. And if Clark County wants this, they can move it closer to them. It is too close to Pahrump, and it's too close for me. Thank you. And in addition, my husband, Mike Barishman, would also like to speak. So could you give him some time too? Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Joyce. We will go through the full list of people who asked to speak, but then we'll definitely give time afterwards for anybody who would like to speak. And if you raise your hand again at that point, your husband can speak as well. And then I just wanted to remind everybody about your first question, which was that you had asked a question but hadn't heard a response. If you go to the Q&A function, there should be a tab that you can toggle to, which has the answers. And as we go through the rest of this presentation, we'll also be including answers there so folks can see their questions and also the answers. So next on our list was Alicia S. Alicia, can you please raise your hand and we will unmute your microphone. It looks like we'll move on to the next person. That would be Beth Lee. Beth Lee, if you would like to speak, can you please raise your hand? If you're on the phone, you can press *9. Would Beth like to speak? Okay, next on the list is Heather Gang. Heather, if you're here and want to speak, please raise your hand. Use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen. Okay, next on the list is Kevin Emmerich.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. My name's Kevin Emmerich. I represent an organization called Basin and Range Watch that follows poorly sited energy projects. Rough Hat Clark County definitely qualifies as a poorly sited energy project for the following reason. Well, number one, I believe it's the applicant telling you folks that there's not a lot of desert pavement on the site. Having walked that site a few times now, I would say it's well over 50%. And that's why people get concerned about dust emissions. And the Yellow Pine Solar Project being built right now cannot control their dust. Another thing Yellow Pine promised they would do is they would leave vegetation standing 18 to 24 inches. It's mowed down to the roots. They completely lied about that. Unfortunately, Candela came to Pahrump trying to sell the Rough Hat Nye project and gave a lot of inaccurate info. So I think that's where that's coming. The desert tortoise density, you counted the tortoises in 2021 on one of the driest years possible. The chances are it's a lot higher than Candela is saying. Yellow Pine Solar, they said there'd be 53, they found 140. Fish and Wildlife Service just announced that the desert tortoise has declined throughout its range by 37%. Now, I know the BLM is under intense political pressure to approve these projects, but I hope you realize that taking out like 4 square miles at a time like this is a death sentence for the desert tortoise. You are driving it to extinction. All the mitigation in the world is not going to fix this. This is a very sad time for us. I thought you guys could do much better management. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. We'll turn to the next slide. And the next person who asked to speak is Mason Bowl.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, yes, my name is Mason Vale. I'm the executive director of the Amargosa Conservancy. I have a question pertaining to the potential for an on-site well to be installed for this project. We know that there are hydrological connections between the proposed area and down gradient resources such as the Amargosa Wild and Scenic River and numerous endangered species. So just wondering how pumping from that well will be considered, just considering those hydraulic connections and the impact they could have on those down gradient resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. Appreciate that. If you didn't put your question in the question and answer function, please do, and you'll also be able to get an answer that way. The next person on the list is James Cook. James, if you're here, please use the raised hand function. Okay. Next is Daniela Gonzalez. You raise your hand, we'll unmute you. Okay. Next on the list is John Hyatt. John, if you raise your hand, we can unmute you.
Hello, this is John Hyatt. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. When the programmatic EIS was done, it was really envisioned that we would have tens of thousands of acres of solar farms in Nevada. And that's really what the solar energy zones were designed for. And the variance areas were for some excess and over that. It turns out now that we're really looking at probably millions of acres of solar panels in the Western United States to accommodate the goal of reducing CO2 emissions by 50% by 2030. And we really have no overarching plan for how to do this. And so I think that it would be appropriate for the BLM to pause on all of these applications and really come up with a plan of how we're going to actually generate the amount of energy from the public lands that's being asked for and preserve those key areas that provide essential ecological services and provide for wildlife that's endemic here. And I don't see that happening. So it's really imperative to have a plan. And when I asked the question about decommissioning, your answer was, well, we require that, that's part of the program. That you didn't really say, do we expect the need for renewable energy to go away in 30 years? Obviously, we do not. And so these are really permanent installations, and we need to acknowledge that and really deal with this upfront from a planning perspective, rather than have ad hoc plans that were really based on the plans for mines rather than renewable energy. The BLM is really remiss in not really pursuing a viable planning effort for renewable energy in the Western United States. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We got one more request in through the Q&As. Patrick Donnelly, you had requested to speak. If you put up your hand, we'll unmute your microphone. Patrick, are you there?
Yes, hello. This is Patrick Donnelly. I'm Great Basin Director with the Center for Biological Diversity. BLM is designating a de facto solar energy zone in the Pahrump Valley. And it started with yellow pine. You know, when that was approved, all these other applications were already in the mix and they were a known quantity. And I would say you sort of dodged a bullet with yellow pine because nobody had any lawyers to put on it. But yellow pine functionally opened up the Pahrump Valley west of Tacopa Road as a de facto solar energy zone. And now yellow pine is metastasized, and there's 6 projects which will completely annihilate the native biodiversity of the Pahrump Valley over an almost 35 square mile area. And there are 2 agency actions here. You know, number 1, you're deciding whether or not to authorize the Rough Hat Clark project. But number 2, you're deciding whether or not to allow proliferation of these projects, a de facto solar energy zone in Pahrump Valley. This raises a number of issues. So for instance, with rare plants, you know, there's numerous rare plants in Pahrump Valley, including the Pahrump buckwheat and the Pahrump borage. Your presentation said they did plant surveys for this project in May of 2022, which was a disastrous year due to the drought, and many plant species didn't come up at all. Well, if all 6 projects have surveys done during extreme drought conditions, there could be whole populations of rare plants that go undetected, and then 30 square miles of desert gets bulldozed under, and we lose this biodiversity and not even know what's happening. And the same with tortoises. You know, this is not just a single project. This is the decimation of a large population of desert tortoises. And, you know, some of these proposed mitigation measures like translocation or on-site reoccupancy are just not sufficient to prevent degradation and jeopardy to the overall species. So the cumulative effects of authorizing all these projects will be very severe. And as a result, mitigation needs to be more broad in its conceptualization. There must be a regional mitigation strategy to prevent further harm to the biodiversity and regional connectivity of the North Mojave Desert. This includes protecting existing public lands. Additionally, there's many other solar applications in the area, including several on BLM land on the California side.
Thank you, Patrick. If we have additional time at the end and people want to speak again, we'll certainly give another 2 minutes at that point. But I skipped Judy Bronfman, and I apologize for that. Judy, are you here? Please raise your hand if you'd like to speak.
Can you give my time to the prior speaker?
Of course. Pat, if you'd like to raise your hand, we'll unmute you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just finish what I was saying. There's multiple other solar applications in the California side of Pahrump Valley, including on the Hidden Hills project site on private land, as well as several on BLM land near where the Old Spanish Trail goes to California Valley. So, you know, the proposal here is not just one solar project. It is turning Pahrump Valley into a large-scale industrial energy production zone across tens of thousands of acres of desert. And as a result, it needs to be treated as a cohesive project and dealt with in that way for the evaluation and for mitigation. And finally, I'd like to echo the earlier comment about having a well on site. That is a flow path to the Amargosa River from Mount Charleston, and down gradient are extremely sensitive hydrologic resources, and any analysis of pumping there is going to have a long look at what the effects of that pumping might be on the Amargosa River. So probably better served just getting that water in Pahrump and retiring water rights to acquire it. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And I apologize that we cut you off so abruptly last time. Judy, there's still time. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. We're happy to give you the 2 minutes. So those are all the folks who registered and said they would yes or maybe like to speak, but we want to encourage anybody who would like to speak to please raise their hand at this time, and we will unmute. And Judy, just again, I want to just reiterate one more time that if you do want to speak, we're happy to give you your full 2 minutes. So please, please let us know. Please raise your hand, and we'd be happy to give you that time frame. Okay. At this time, we have a couple of people who have raised their hand to speak again.
This is Kevin Emmerich again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to make an additional comment about visual resources and downgrading the plan, the resource management plan. When the Yellow Pine Solar Project was approved, it happened during COVID under the Trump administration during the first COVID lockdown. We didn't even get a public meeting. But what's really curious about Yellow Pine was the entire project, except for a little sliver of it, is being constructed on visual class 3 lands. We asked and asked, and you all would not amend that plan. You said it would not have a visual impact. You really did say that. You said that the visual class 3 you can have some disturbance, but it's not supposed to dominate the landscape. And you can't really pull that off with a big solar project. It's really dangerous to do this, to amend the plan, because when you did the original resource management plan, 1997, I believe it was, a little over 25 years ago, you decided that that area around the Tacopa Road had valuable visual resources for recreational values, because, well, it's near the old Spanish National Historic Trail, but it's also very visible from several wilderness areas like the California Desert, Kingston Range, also in Nevada. That smart planning was actually made in order to protect that landscape, and it was based on an analysis of people's values in the area. It's a popular route, for example, from Death Valley to Las Vegas. Downgrading that plan really goes against what everybody feels about the area. A lot of people who live in Pahrump are saying, hey, we don't want to see this. I mean, that's really basically the reason that BLM decided that was a higher visual class in the first place. I think it's a grave mistake to downgrade that entire area and to make it, as it was said before, a de facto solar zone. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. If anybody wants to raise their hand, there's another opportunity to speak. Judy, I'm still going to put the offer out to you. If you're interested, you're welcome to take your 2 minutes. Meanwhile, it looks like Joyce Barishma has asked to speak again.
My husband would like to speak, Mike Barishman.
Ladies and gentlemen of Pahrump, particularly Artesia and Cottonwoods, we're being lied to completely and totally. If this project doesn't care about sucking our life waters like vampires out of our aquifers, if they don't care that our property values are going to go down, if they don't care that it's going to discourage people from moving in this neighborhood, if they don't care that the temperature is going to be raised when these farms are coming right up to our major streets and close to the schools, what makes you think they're going to care about the turtles and the flora and the fauna and the dust and everything else that's going on with destroying all of the property that it's going to take to make low quality electricity for solar that's not even going to us? They don't even have the decency to offer us anything. They're not going to hire anyone locally to do the work, and what little there is of managing a solar farm. They want everything for free. They want to completely take advantage of us. They haven't offered us anything except what? Tax revenue, $1 million a year for 30 years. Big whoop. You see the numbers that are being thrown around by the government now, and $1 million a year really is just drop in the bucket and a spit in the ocean. I encourage everybody to tell your friends about this. We've got to stop these solar farms. Nobody complained about big oil when gasoline was $2.30 a gallon, but now we have big solar to mess with. Nobody's complaining about that. Nobody's complaining about the low quality of electricity that we get for countless thousands of acres it takes to make it. Your house will not even run independently with solar panels that you can put on your own property. When they can.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you want to continue.
And a car that can run independently with a solar panel on a roof, then maybe they have something. It's bull. This is completely destroying our community. We have brand new houses that are for sale here that are hard enough to sell because of how the interest rates went up. We have beautiful communities here that are new. We have new houses. We're encouraging people to come and live here. and bring businesses that employ people, that offer services. These solar farms don't do anything for us. They don't even have the decency to offer us any free electricity for the amount of damage they're going to be doing to our neighborhoods.
Mike, I'm going to ask you to finish up your thought, please.
Just wait till some kind of disaster happens because of the trucks that are going to be moving up and down Hafen Ranch Road. Just wait for a big disaster to happen like that.
Next, we have a hand up for John Hyatt.
Thank you. I would just like to follow up a little bit on the water situation. I think that the cumulative impacts have to really look at water for all of those projects, because if it's going to take 800 acre feet for the construction of this one. If they all happen, it would take several thousand acre feet. The recharge in the Pahrump Valley is only about 12,000 acre feet a year in the alluvial fill. And so we're talking about a significant portion of what is supposed to be a year's recharge. And those numbers come from a much wetter time. So this will have an impact on water resources there and downstream on the Amargosa River. So we really need to seriously look at the impacts of a very large amount of water that would be used for dust control. Thank you.
Thank you, John. If anybody else would like to speak, anybody who hasn't spoken before, or anybody who has spoken before and would like another 2 minutes, please raise your hand and we can give you another 2 minutes. We'll just pause for a moment in case anybody decides they do want to speak. Okay, well, it appears that those are all the people who have asked to speak at this time. As one more reminder, the public scoping comment period is open until December 5th, and you can comment via email, sending in a hard copy comment, or using the Comment Now button on the BLM website. Corinne will now do a brief closeout, but I will remind people that our meeting is open until 8, and we will be available here if anybody decides at a later time that they do want to speak. We're available to listen.
I want to close out the night. Thank you, Emily. And I want to say how much I appreciate all of you spending your evening with us to discuss the Rough Hat County Solar Project. We have definitely heard a lot of great questions and input to be considered as we move forward with the NEPA process. Please continue to send us your comments during the public scoping period through Monday, December 5th. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you, Corinne. Just as one more reminder for anybody who's on and wants to remain on, we will be here until 8. So if anybody would like to speak, please feel free to use the raised hand function, and we will provide an additional 2 minutes. Phone-in caller, if you wanted to speak, you could also press *9, and that would be the raise hand function.